Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the TAPED podcast, the most bald podcast in the world. We're your host, as always, myself, MickyT.
And me, Nostalgia.
And welcome to another edition of our Worst to Best series. As always, we have a guest for these. And this guest is a friend of the channel. He's been on multiple Worst to Best in the past. It's been a good while since we've heard from him. But please welcome Josh.
Woo.
Hi, everybody.
Howdy.
How have you been, man?
I've been alright. At least I was until I did this discography binge, but oh boy, we'll sure get to that in a second.
We will definitely get to that in a second, because today we are going to be doing a Worst to Best on a band that has a notoriously kind of downhill discography, but at the same time they've delivered on some incredible classics in the alternative rock genre, and that, of course, is from the band The Smashing Pumpkins. I've been very excited to do this one. It's been a journey, to say the least. And yeah, y'all know how this works by now. We're going to be ranking everything that they've done from Gish all the way up to their most recent album, Seer. We're not going to be including any live albums, compilations, EPs, any of that. Just this studio stuff that has been officially released. And with that in mind, we have 11 albums here. And we are going to start at number 11, our worst picks. And in my opinion, the worst Smashing Pumpkins album is Monuments to an Elegy.
It wasn't an easy choice, but I went with Seer.
Yes, I also went with Seer.
Aye, normal order.
I guess I'm the fucking Lone Ranger here. Let's go.
Don't worry, I have plenty of words for that album.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that there's going to be a few people listening to this right now who are a little confused as to why this album in particular is at the bottom of my list, as I've rarely seen people really place it as the band's absolute worst album. Usually that would end up being reserved for albums like Zeitgeist and Seer. But honestly, Monuments to an Elegy has to be the worst in their discography for me. There's just so much wrong with this album for me to consider otherwise. I suppose the only redeeming factor that this album has going for it is the fact that it's one of the shortest Smashing Pumpkins albums. But outside of that, this record is honestly pretty damn embarrassing on so many fronts. Like, get that Billy Corgan had to change something sonically in order to appeal to a younger demographic, but his attempts to do so are woeful at best, in my opinion. He essentially incorporates a lot of synth-pop aspects to the band's normal alt-rock sound, and it honestly sounds absolutely hideous. It's about as hideous as you'd expect. The synthesizers all over this album are so dated and incredibly cheesy. The synth-pop tracks themselves are embarrassingly corny. And it doesn't help that Billy Corgan is writing some of his most sickeningly cringe lyrics to date on this album. The drumming from Tommy Lee is about as unremarkable as you'd expect. And sometimes the overly loud production is just so grating and often just head-splitting. On top of all of this, the more straightforward alt-rock stuff that we normally see from the Pumpkins is at its most uninspired and excruciatingly dull. This is just the band being as left... So let me say that again, Jesus Christ. This really is just the band being left as a shell of their former selves, and it's just sad. All Monuments to an Elegy really sounds like to me is an obligation. It doesn't sound like music that comes from a real place to be connected with. It's just music that exists for the sake of existing. It's offensively inoffensive. I think that it's the band's worst by a mile. It's bland, and it's so unenjoyable from start to finish. That's why it's at my number 11.
Yeah. I went with Seer from one Smashing Pumpkins synth-pop album to another, and nobody asked for it the first time around. Nobody certainly asked for it the second time around. I'll talk about Monuments to an Elegy soon. Spoiler alert, I hate both of them. But I just think this one is just a little bit worse, if not for any reason other than the length. I can somewhat tolerate 30 minutes of this shit, but over an hour is just actually a struggle to get through. It is torture. There is nothing about this album that, screams passion, nothing about this album that screams any sort of, identity or any sort of idea as to what the Pumpkins want to do with themselves. It just feels like, for lack of a better word, pointless. There's nothing about this that is enjoyable. There's nothing about this that is appealing to, classic Pumpkins fans. I don't think there's any Pumpkins fans that have just kind of jumped on the bandwagon recently and been like, oh, I like this fucking synth-pop band with this creepy bald singer. I'm going to fucking check out their new album. I don't know who this is aimed towards. It sounds so lifeless, so soulless. There is very little value on this project. It is just one consistently just boring and uninspired and just sterile mess. There's nothing exciting here. It's a mess, and it lasts way too long. It goes on for so long. Holy shit. Yeah, I hate this album.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I don't know. It's Smashing Pumpkins just goes full blown synth pop on this album, and it sounds horrible. What else is there to say? I mean, there's plenty more to say, especially considering where this album is, because we have yet another double album from Smashing Pumpkins, and I am personally offended that they go from making the best double album I've ever heard in my life to one of the worst I've ever heard. And it's just such a frustrating listen. And I do kind of share the same sentiments that Nostalgia has, where, I mean, this sound that they've gone and attempted now twice, I don't like it. But I mean, if I were given a choice between a half an hour of it and like almost an hour and a half of it, I would definitely choose the half an hour. And it's just, I don't know what was going on in this album. It's, it's always interesting to get to these albums that are my least favorite, because they're just like, I'm just so confused. It's just confusing what like the decisions that were made while making this album. I mean, it's terrible synth pop, but I mean, I guess to this album's credit, it at least commits to it, not fully. There are a couple songs where I'm like, why did you just have to try to make this rockin' tune in the middle of your synth pop album that already sounds terrible? I don't know. It sounds like they tried to be late era Depeche Mode, if that makes any sense. It's, I don't know, not a good album. Also, just personal gripe, Billy, you need to learn how to spell. Like, what are these song titles? Like, you are spelling almost all of these songs, like Witch, you spelled Witch wrong. You spelled Starcraft wrong. You spelled Adrenaline wrong. Like, I get it. You're cool, okay? You're cool. But, I mean, I don't know. That was just a personal gripe. Just thought I'd point that out real quick. Anyways, no. Get this album away from me.
Billy Corgan's too cool to spell.
I guess so. He definitely shows that on this album's track listing.
Honestly. And yeah, with that in mind, my favorite track from Monuments to an Elegy, favorite is a bit of a stretch. Tiberius, the worst tracks are Run to Me, Drum and Fife, and Dorian.
My favorite track is Color of Love, which I don't necessarily love, but it's definitely the most tolerable track on this project. Unfortunately, it's the first track, so strap in. My least favorite tracks are Confessions of a Dopamine Addict, Starcraft, and Purple Blood.
Yeah, my favorite track on this album was actually, I guess, a deep cut, Anno Satana, and I mean, it's not a favorite, but I have to pick something, and honestly, my least favorite track is like pretty much everything else on this album. I'm gonna be honest, but I guess I'd have to give special shout outs to Starcraft, Purple Blood, Adrenaline, Haunted, The Hidden Sun, Tiger. Like, what was going on in that song? And Minerva. Like, you're not Deftones. Don't try to be Deftones. Never use that song name again. Anyways, God,
Deftones have the copyright now.
They do. Only Deftones can use the word Minerva, so get away from it, Billy.
Yeah. And yeah, moving on to our number 10 picks, I chose Seer.
I chose Monuments to an Elegy.
I also chose Monuments to an Elegy.
Getting the fucking synth pop shite out the way.
Oh yeah.
Seriously.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Smashing Pumpkins' most recent album is really nothing to write home about, honestly. I'd say it's an interesting stylistic change of pace from the bland alt-rock that the band kept, cropping up with on previous albums, but unfortunately Seer just doesn't do much of anything compelling or interesting with this sonic change-up, and the fact that it's 72 minutes fucking long doesn't help. Seer sees the band dabble in synth pop heavily, and I can respect the stylistic change-up, but like I said, the band doesn't make anything interesting or compelling out of it. In fact, it's just an unimaginative slog to sit through, and it's plain through and through. There isn't enough interesting ideas on this album to make it viable. We're just being handed mediocre synth pop track after mediocre synth pop track. The production choices for a lot of the synths are at times just really grating, and whenever it isn't grating, it's just very bland. I do like some of the catchier hooks and vocal lines from Billy Corgan, but those moments are few and far in between, and there's just so much blatant filler all over this album. There's a few decent cuts here and there, but generally speaking, it's just such a self-indulgent and mind-numbing album that takes itself way too seriously, and it's just way too long. This album is a far cry from the Smashing Pumpkins that I and many others loved, and Sear is arguably the epitome of the band's uninventive mediocrity. At least moments on Monuments to an Elegy are memorably bad. Sear is just boring and monotonous. That's it.
I mean, honestly, my opinions of this project are very similar to my opinions of Sear. I think the thing that makes me hate it a little bit less is the fact that it's really short and I don't have to suffer for as long. Other than that, I mean, I'll state the obvious. This style it does not suit Billy Corgan. It does not suit the Pumpkins. And the execution is just boring. It's uninspired. It seems forced. And honestly, this project just sounds awkward as fuck. Tracks like Run to Me are just mind-numbingly just poorly executed. There's no way that, anyone thought that this was a good idea for the Smashing Pumpkins to release a track like this. This had to have gone through so many people, and nobody listened to it and went, oh, fuck, Billy, we need to talk. It exists. That's the only thing I can really say about this project.
Crash Thompson will disagree with you.
I don't want to hear it, man.
Yeah, that should have been my warning sign. But Monuments to an Elegy. Well, I mean, if you're listening to these albums in chronological order, this sure is an unpleasant surprise, isn't it? Ooh, I mean, where do I even begin? I mean, thank you for bringing up "Run to Me" because I was listening to that song and I had mentioned this connection and this similarity in sound to a couple people, but honestly, call me crazy, but "Run to Me" sounds like if "Guns for Hands" by 21 Pilots and "Follow Me" by Muse had like a baby, and like that's the song. Like that's just one song. And honestly, this album just sounds like the beginning of when Billy Corgan just completely gave up on all aspects of this band. And honestly, that may reflect the ill fate of the Tear Garden by Kaleidoscope project that he was working on, which, I mean, that wasn't very good either because there was some pretty... I mean, have any of you heard the Tear Garden by Kaleidoscope projects, like, just out of curiosity?
I have not.
Oh man, yeah. If you can track down some of those songs, man, it is just a funny time. But like,
send them to me.
I will. But and everybody listening, you can listen at your own discretion. But I don't know. It's not full blown synth pop, but like there's just like too much synth pop going on for my taste, and I don't know, Billy's voice just sounds like worse than ever on this album. I don't know what it is, and this album kind of follows this unfortunate pattern that happens in these 2000s and 2010s albums that I will get to later in the podcast, but yeah, I don't know, it's better than Sear, I guess, but I still am never gonna throw this album on. Like, it's just a mess.
Yeah, and speaking of Sear, my favorite tracks from Sear are The Color of Love and Anno Satana. The worst tracks are Schadenfreude, Adrenaline, Witch, Starcraft, and Minerva.
My favorites on Monuments to an Elegy is Being Beige. My least favorite track is without a doubt Run to Me, probably my least favorite Pumpkins track.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'd probably say the same. Run to Me probably is the worst Pumpkins track I've ever heard. But my favorite tracks, I'm actually gonna combine yours, and I'm gonna say Tiberius and Being Beige. I guess are my favorite tracks on the album, but again, I'm never gonna listen to these songs outside of this album. And my least favorites are A Nice, Run to Me, Monuments, Dorian, and Antihero.
All right, and with that in mind, we're on to our number 9 picks, and I chose Shiny and Oh So Bright Volume 1.
I went with Zeitgeist.
I also went with Shiny and Also Bright, Volume 1, LP, No Past, No Future, whatever the hell that album's called.
Who's gonna fucking say all that shit, man? Okay, so, Nostalgia, you want to go last then?
Yeah.
Alright, so, yeah. Another one of the more recent entries in the Smashing Pumpkins discography fails to really do much of anything that's interesting or captivating again. This album also saw the return of most of the original lineup, since Jimmy Chamberlain came back to the band again and James Iha returned after 18 years. Rick Rubin also did the production on this album, and honestly, out of all the more recent albums, this should have been the one that recaptured the magic of the band's best work, but unfortunately it's not, since it's very mediocre. Now, much like Monuments to an Elegy, Shiny and Oh So Bright is a relatively short album for the Smashing Pumpkins at 8 tracks and 31 minutes, but none of that 31 minutes has much in the way of anything that's interesting. In fact, most of the record is just bland rehashes of ideas that the band did better in the past. Now, sonically, this album does give me Melancholy vibes, but none of the material here reaches the heights of anything that was on Melancholy, and it strips away some of the aspects that made the band's music enjoyable. The production all throughout is incredibly dry and compressed. It's so sterile and bland. There's very little that's dynamic about what the band are doing on here. The songwriting is incredibly unimaginative, and the guitar work and drumming is just so dry and, for lack of better words, just straight up boring. There's not really much else I could say about Shiny and Oh So Bright. I'd say it's easily the most forgettable album in the band's discography. It's incredibly boring, and there's absolutely nothing of note here. I don't hate it as much as I do Monuments to an Elegy, but I really just don't give a shit about it.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned the Melancholy vibes. I mean, personally, I've never heard anybody say that, and I've never heard anything on this album that had given me that vibe. But that's actually an interesting perspective. I had never heard anything like that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about it. I just feel like, I don't know, I guess just the essence of the whole thing just kind of gives that vibe, but I don't know, I might be crazy. Who knows? I might be longing for Melancholy.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're probably just like longing for the good old days.
Honestly.
But yeah, Shining Not So Bright. Billy got the band back together, except for Darcy, because she's like a drug addict or whatever, and we can't be friends with a drug addict, I guess. I don't know.
I know. I think
that whole drama
he
was.
definitely asked her to, but she denied repeatedly. From what I'm aware.
Yeah, there's been conflicting stories and stuff. Like, she said that she was never asked, and then Billy said that she was asking her like all the time. Who cares?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's fucking complicated as hell.
Yeah, and I for her sake, I'm glad that she didn't end up on this album. But I don't know. I mean, I get like, okay. Scratch that, strike that, reverse it. The Billy got the band back together. Hooray. But here's the problem. It doesn't sound like the creative juices started flowing again once we had all these original members back in the band. This album kind of sounds like Billy went, cool, I got my original bandmates back. Now I can use them to make my shitty solo music a reality. It's like Again, it's like, it doesn't matter who is in the band at this point anymore, and that's what's frustrating about this band. It's like, I don't know what's going on with the creative process or the songs that Billy's writing these days, but even a monumental moment as getting the Smashing Pumpkins back together, and granted, the reunion tour was awesome. I actually went to one of the shows, and this was before that this album even dropped, and it was when Solara was the only song that had been released, post reunion. And I'm not gonna mince words, that concert is probably one of, if not the best concert I've ever been to. So it was just amazing, and that's why I'm just frustrated, and I don't understand why they were able to capture that magic back on stage again, but this album just kind of falls flat on its face. And I had mentioned that album formula in the previous album, but even this album kind of breaks that formula, because I mean, I'll explain it in the next couple of albums, like the full formula that I was thinking of. But rather than having like a couple okay tracks at the beginning, this album just falls flat on its face. Like I'm sorry, I cannot stand Knights of Malta. That I think that song is great, like just so grating to my ears. I remember I threw that album on and I was like, man, this is not going to be a good time, is it? And it wasn't. So thanks. Also, just quick side note, Marching On sounds like an attempt to be classic Pumpkins, and I think maybe that's where you got the Melancholy vibe, but for me it ends up just sounding like hilarious butt rock. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
I could definitely agree with the butt rock part, definitely.
Yeah, I went with different pick. I went with Zeitgeist, and this album honestly it's just absolutely nothing to write home about. It's not completely worthless. It's also it has nothing of note on it. It has no new ideas. It has no fresh ideas on it. It goes about as well as an aging and uninspired Smashing Pumpkins album could, in a hard rock style that just sounds awfully forced. Sounds like it was honestly just made for like rock radio. There's nothing here that, screams passion, nothing here that screams any sort of the emotion or intensity that went into the Pumpkins' earlier work. And, the album's quality definitely suffers because of this. It just feels forced. It feels unnatural. It just sounds quite rough. It just doesn't sound appealing at all. And honestly, it's cookie cutter alt rock, with a very unwanted hard rock flair to it. And it's a complete miss for the band, in my opinion. And in my opinion, the first miss in their discography, if you're listening to it chronologically. It's just completely unexciting and sterile.
Alright, with that in mind, my favourite tracks off of Shiny and Oh So Bright Volume 1 are Silvery Sometimes and Knights of Malta. The worst tracks are Travels, Alienation, and With Sympathy.
Yeah, no, my favorite tracks on Shiny No So Bright were Silvery Sometimes and Solara. Again, slim pickings here. And my least favorites were Knights of Malta, Alienation, and Marching On.
My favorite track on Zeitgeist was That's the Way My Love Is, and my least favorite track is Forgotten Country.
Alright, we're moving on to the number 8 picks, and I chose Zeitgeist.
I went with Oceania.
I also chose Zeitgeist. Man, we're getting these albums out of the
Same
way
order
real
again.
quick.
Yeah, same order. Alright, to be honest, there isn't too much that I can say about Zeitgeist, because Zeitgeist is just such a really plain and middle-of-the-road album in the Pumpkins' discography, and generally speaking, it doesn't do a whole lot aside from being just fine and listenable alt-rock. At this stage, the band returned after their breakup in 2000, well, what was left of them, since it was just Billy Corgan and Jimmy Chamberlain from the original lineup. They featured a host of collaborators all over this thing, and sonically it was taking an approach that wasn't trying to be some of the band's more ambitious outings like Adore and Machina. And while it may have some gems in it, it ultimately is just a very mixed affair for me. There's things that I can appreciate about Zeitgeist. I like some of the riffs on this thing. I like some of the guitar work. Jimmy Chamberlain's drumming and lyricism what am I even saying here? Jimmy Chamberlain's drumming is really good. And I mixed up my sentence there, sorry. The lyricism is taking a more political approach in contrast with what we normally expect from the band. But, ultimately the very back to basics and rudimentary alt-rock doesn't really lend itself well to a lot of memorable material. There's some hard rock tinged parts in there, like Nostalgia said, and there's, I guess it's fine. It's just okay. It reminds me of okay versions of Foo Fighters songs, but Billy Corgan's vocals are on top of them, and whenever they try to do something bigger and more dynamic, they just end up falling flat on their faces like God and Country, which is just way too slow. And the track United States as well, which is so excruciating. It's 9 minutes long. I would mention the production, but I had to listen to this album on YouTube since it wasn't on Spotify, so the clean MP3 was not something I could get to experience, which I guess whatever. I would talk more about it, but I just don't have anything else to say, honestly. It's just a mid Foo Fighters album.
That's fine. I didn't want to listen to the MP3 version anyway. Well, lucky for you, Mickey, I did find an MP3 version, and I'm going to tell you right now, it didn't sound any better. So you weren't missing out on much. Just I didn't mean to spoil it, but you weren't missing out on much. So you can, I guess.
Shucks.
Yeah.
Oh, boo-hoo. I can't listen to Zeitgeist again.
God damn it. I wanted to listen to that album for the rest of my life.
It's the best Smashing Pumpkins album, didn't you know?
Yeah. But actually, speaking of that, this is probably going to sound weird. This album is better than I was expecting. Like, don't get me wrong. I do not like this album. This album is not good. But from the sheer backlash of this album, I mean, it's like you said, it's not on Spotify. It's really hard to find. It's like this album just like doesn't exist anymore. And everyone always says that this is the worst Smashing Pumpkins album. So I was so scared to listen to this. But it was like, it was okay for like the first few tracks. But oh man, I was baited so hard by this album. I mean, this is like the first instance of the quote-unquote band getting back together, because they did get Jimmy Chamberlain back, which is cool, and he does sound pretty good on this album. And again, with like the first few tracks, the riffs and everything, it sounded like that Billy meant business when he got this album going. But man, like the production is grating as hell on this album, and it's a bit too long considering like the quality of the material on here. Like you mentioned United States, like, oh my God, that song does not need to be as long as it is. And it's not even good.
Honestly.
Like it's not even a good song. Like when it starts out and it's like, yeah, great. I can't wait to listen to 8 more minutes of this song. And it's just like, I don't know. Like it started out like okay. And I thought that I was going to be like, oh, this album's actually pretty underrated. But it's like, that's what everyone says on, I don't know, do any of you follow Smashing Pumpkins or like Billy on Instagram?
No, not really.
No.
Like, that's what, it's so funny, but like, that's why I was scared for Sear, and that's why I was kind of like, oh, maybe Zeitgeist will be okay, because it's so funny. It's just so funny to see all these like ride or die like Pumpkins fans, where they're like, they put like the music on their stories and stuff, and it's always stuff from like Sear and Monuments and like Zeitgeist, or like they'll post pictures of like their CD copies of Zeitgeist, and it's always like, yeah, like these albums are awesome, and then like Smashing Pumpkins will like repost them on their stories. And I loved the ones that when Sear came out, everyone's like, oh my God, this album's amazing. And I was listening to the snippets and I'm like, oh God, oh, I have to listen to this album, don't I? But it's like, it's so funny. And like this album in particular, everyone's like, oh man, this album was like super underrated. And I was expecting to, I wanted to come in here so badly with a hot take, like, oh man, you guys don't get it, Zeitgeist is actually pretty cool. No. It's not pretty cool. And also the political message is basically Billy taking a spoon and trying to force feed it down my throat, and I don't appreciate it.
Eat your politics now.
It's good for you.
I can imagine fucking Billy Corgan saying that. Eat your politics now.
I went with Oceania, which admittedly isn't awful, and admittedly has some moments where, you know, I genuinely find myself enjoying the project, and I do appreciate what the Pumpkins go for on this album. After a hiatus, they kind of return to a sound that delves into their roots and into the sounds of, you know, the band explored in the 90s. And, you know, even though it feels like a half-hearted attempt to restore any of that magic, you know, those were definitely still the best years of the Pumpkins. So I think automatically it is kind of a little more enjoyable than them trying to do a synth pop or hard rock album. And while it does have its moments, you know, moments where things click and some of that, you know, good old Smashing Pumpkins magic kind of seeps through, but the vast majority of this project is just, you know, devoid of any passion. It's just completely unexciting filler. There's no new ideas. There's nothing exciting here. But still, when, you know, you take this project and compare it to the rest of the post-Machina discography of the Pumpkins, it's definitely far from the worst. It definitely has some, you know, merit to its name. And while, again, it's not an album that I'm going to be returning to regularly or at all even, it's still okay. At least it's okay.
All right. With that in mind, my favorite tracks from Zeitgeist are Doomsday Clock and Bleeding the Orchid. The worst tracks are Forgotten Country and United States. Fuck those two songs, seriously.
True. Oh man, yeah, no. Yeah, so you make a fair point. My
I
favorite
really
tracks. Yeah, no, God, I'll get to them. But my favorite tracks were Doomsday Clock, Chevron Shades of Black. That's the Way My Love Is, and my least favorite tracks were Tarantula, Stars, United States, Come On Let's Go, Forgotten Country, and Pomp and Circumstances.
My favorite tracks were The Celestials, Violet Rays, Pinwheels, and Oceania. My least favorite track was Pale Horse.
All right, we're moving on to our number 7 picks, and I chose Machina.
I chose Shiny and Oh So Bright.
Oh, thank God. Oh, I thought I was coming in with a hot take. Yeah, no, my 7th pick is Machina, the Machines of God.
Man, we are twinning. Holy fuck.
Again, I'll go
Yeah, I know.
The fuck yeah, dude. Yeah.
Sorry, nostalgia.
Nostalgia's being left on the back burner again.
I'm just the most
All right,
based.
so
Yeah.
sure you are, buddy. All right. So yeah, Machina, the final album that would see all the original band members in the Smashing Pumpkins together, and it's another moment where the Smashing Pumpkins overhauled their overall sound from what they've done previously, but for me it's also the first true dud in the band's discography, since I feel like the album just doesn't work as a whole cohesive record, and it misses the mark in terms of what it tries to do sonically and conceptually. You know, not that there isn't any good material on this album, because there certainly is. There's some tracks that are really good and are genuinely catchy with that Smashing Pumpkins charm. But for all the good tracks on here, there's another track that's just void of anything for me to latch onto. I do think the engineering and overall production of this album, is solid despite some of the odd vocal mixes here and there, and generally it's pretty cohesive in terms of what it does sonically, but for what it does in sonic cohesion, it lacks in substance and memorability. You know, this for me was the point where you could truly hear the somewhat pretentious nature of the Pumpkins' work post their peak. It tries to incorporate an overarching concept that honestly isn't that interesting or unique in my opinion, and at times it honestly gets very nonsensical and hard to follow. The album is way too long with an abundance of tracks that you could honestly just do without, and while I appreciate the band's callbacks to more heavy sounds akin to their work pre-Adore, the inclusions of more industrial tinged sounds alongside the neo-psychedelic atmospheres are just not really landing with me. It falls victim to the loudness war, and it comes off like the band didn't really fully flesh out these sounds and ideas well enough to make them sound like they had heart to them. Now, also, there's a few moments where the distortion and wishy-washy sounds are just absolutely irritating to listen to. Honestly, after some of their good to decent tracks, it becomes an absolute chore to listen to, given how bloated and at times sloppy it is, and it just doesn't have the same charm or energy that made the Smashing Pumpkins work great in the past. Also, it's a shame that this would be the last album to feature Billy, Darcy, James, and Jimmy all together as a band, so yeah, that sucks, I guess. So, all in all, I'm not very crazy about Machina.
Yeah, I mean, that's the weird thing, because when I was doing this binge again, because I'd heard this album a few times before I did the binge, and I thought I liked this album more than I ended up liking it now, which is weird, but I don't know. Maybe I had some ride or die Pumpkins blood inside me. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. This is just a strange album, and I thought I liked it more, but okay, I've been teasing it for a little bit, and if you'll indulge me for a second, this is where the post-Adore album formula begins. So, I noticed that almost every album without fail, after Adore, starts with decent songs for like the first 4 or 5 tracks. So it's like, I'm going to be honest, Everlasting Gaze, banger song. That song is awesome. And then you have like Raindrops and Sunspots or whatever that song is called, and it's like, oh, okay, that song is decent, I guess. But yeah, I'm still here. And then Stand Inside Your Love is a powerhouse song, and maybe I'm stupid, but Eye of the Morning goes so hard, and I don't know why. Like, I've loved that song, and so it's like, okay, yeah, we're still here. And then Sacred and Profane happens, and it's like, okay, like that's still a decent-ish song. And then Try is like, a little too like sappy, but I like the song and it's good. And then Heavy Metal Machine kicks in, and that's when Billy reaches out of the album and just starts bashing your face in for the entirety of the rest of the album, where you're just like getting pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. It's like, oh God, please make it stop. And it's just like, you just, 10-minute track, 6-minute track, terrible song. Like, hey guys, you ever heard of this band called Nine Inch Nails? That kind of song. Boom, boom, boom. For the entirety of the album. And then you're all like beaten, broken, and bloody. And you're like, oh God. Oh, please make it stop. And then Age of Innocence happens, and you're like, it's basically Billy then handing you like a Band-Aid. And you're like, oh, this song's pretty good, I guess. Oh God. And then the album ends. It's like, that's basically what every Smashing Pumpkins album does from this point on. And honestly, I could accept that if some songs where it's like some of the albums, it would end on a decent track, but this is the only one in the formula where it ends on a decent track, because it's every subsequent album after this, it just tricks you with a few couple good tracks, and then it just sucks, like, from that point forward. And I don't know. It's frustrating. So, thanks, Billy.
Thank you, Billy.
I'll need weeks of therapy after this.
I went with Shiny and Oh So Bright, Volume 1, and a load of fucking bullshit. No one reads the full title. Who cares? While this project is very seldom, inventive or unique, and overall it is rather predictable, of all the Smashing Pumpkins albums released post Machina 2, this is probably my favorite, and it's the one that has the most highlights. Well, the most obvious highlights, in my opinion. Silvery Sometimes, I think that song is incredible. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the most infectious and just catchy songs the band have released in years, and it doesn't strike me as annoying or just ear grating like a lot of modern Pumpkins tracks do. I also very much like the track Travels. It's very dynamic, very fun, but then the rest of the album just really fails to establish much of an identity for itself. It just feels like alternative rock pastiche. It feels heartless, and just like the rest of the Smashing Pumpkins back catalogue, it just feels soulless, and it feels like the band is either unsure or just unwilling to step out of their comfort zone, and when they do, it just doesn't work at all. So if the highlights are there, and those two tracks that I mentioned are definitely worth checking this project out for. But as a whole, it's still a very, very weak album, in my opinion.
Alright, my favourite tracks from Machina are Stand Inside Your Love, Eye of the Morning, The Everlasting Gaze, and Age of Innocence. The worst tracks are Glass in the Ghost Children, The Crying Tree of Mercury, and With Every Light.
My favorite track from Machina were The Everlasting Gaze, Stand Inside Your Love, Eye of the Morning, Try, and Age of Innocence. And my least favorites were Heavy Metal Machine, The Imploding Voice, Glass and the Ghost Children, The Crying Tree of Mercury, and With Every Light.
My favorite tracks on Shiny and Oh So Bright were Silvery Sometimes and Travels. My least favorite track was Alienation.
Alright, and we're moving on to our number, is it 6? Yeah, 6. Yeah. And I chose Machina 2.
I also chose Machina 2.
Stop copying me, Mickey. Machina 2.
Alright, normal order this time.
Hey, you get to join us, Nostalgia. Welcome.
Yay, welcome to the Cool Kids Club.
For once, you guys are based.
Now. We're allowing you into our based club, okay?
Sure. Delusional.
Sure. Oh, I'm delusional. Call me Ty from Arsenal Fan TV. Alright, moving on. Right, so, Machina 2. Machina 2 is a bit of a weird one in the Smashing Pumpkins discography, and I'm sure that not a lot of people have actually heard the record since unless you're a diehard fan, because of the way it was released, and it's pretty much become very hard to find these days. Obviously, we found it, we've listened to it, and to me, Machina 2 has a really good album in there. It really does. But with the amount of material and alternative takes on other songs here, it's pretty much just rendered as another bloated endeavor from the Pumpkins. Plus, I do happen to like it more than Machina 1, obviously. In a lot of ways, Machina 2 feels a lot like a B-sides album, but with a bunch of tracks that are new and a few that are alternative takes of tracks that we've seen on albums like Adore and Machina. Plus, this B-sides album sentiment is really brought home with a lot of tracks here not really sounding all that finished, and a few very rough and lo-fi mixes are applied to some of them. But honestly, when listening through what was on this album, there was clearly some massive potential to what was being developed on here, since there's plenty of songs that I genuinely thought were really great and had some really cool ideas and riffs to them. I'll highlight those specific tracks in Best Worst Tracks, but I feel like if the material on here was worked on a little bit more and saw the light of day sometime, then we would have had a quality release from the Pumpkins. But of course, that isn't the case, and Machina 2 suffers from some other issues. It's a very bloated album. It has some moments that are just practically unlistenable, and there's just a lot of dull filler to get through. For what it's worth, it has some moments that work, but it also has too many tracks that don't.
Yeah, I went with the same one for once. This project is definitely confusing. It was released for free online in the early 2000s and has just kind of existed in some sort of a void online ever since. An album's going to be a weird one when, the easiest place to listen to it is archive.org. But you know what, for what it's worth, I think there's some solid material here. The very scattered nature of this project makes for a confusing listen. It's a concoction of original tracks and re-recordings and B-sides and demos and you name it, packaged into one studio album sequel to 2000's Machina 1. And while, this track listing is definitely a major downside to this project, I would also be lying if I said that it didn't have any highlights, and it also has quite a few of them in my opinion. Thematically and conceptually, it's very much similar to the prequel, Machina 1, and it also shares a bit of the flaws with that album, in my opinion. It plays to an already existing Smashing Pumpkins formula well, but it never reaches the heights that the band once reached. And, there's really no reason to listen to this project over the likes of, Siamese Dream or Melancholy or even Adore. But overall, I still think it's definitely good. I probably would not recommend this to anyone other than, fans of the band. But if you're a fan of the Pumpkins, there's a lot of good material on here, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, I was surprised to find that I actually preferred this album to its predecessor, which I was not expecting. And yeah, I'll agree with both of you and kind of sort of piggyback off of that, where it's there is a good album here, and the thing that I was thinking about, which kind of scared me a little bit, was both of these albums came out before Kid A and Amnesiac, and honestly, if Smashing Pumpkins could have played their cards right and made a decent album from this, it could have had a kind of a Kid A Amnesiac type thing going on here. But they didn't, because they're not Radiohead. So, I mean, this album it's just weird structure, because like it is bloated, but even then it really didn't have to be, because this album is basically just like a few little mini EPs like smashed on top of the actual part of the album, and like those EPs are those EPs bring in inconsistency, and then that kind of seeps into like the actual like album of this record. And it's just, I don't know, it's a strange listen. But again, like, there's decent songs here, there's good songs here, and if they could have just like not structured this album in this weird Frankenstein way that, I don't know, it just kind of perplexes me, it could have been a great album. But again, it has inconsistent stuff, and there's some god-awful alternate versions of songs from the first Machina album, like Heavy Metal Machine. Like, wow, that was bad. That was really bad.
It really was. Holy fuck.
Yeah, but it's like, but again, it's like it didn't have to be. Like again, there was songs from the EPs that were good, and they could have put them in like the regular album, and that's just kind of, uh, I guess my sadness towards this album, where it's like this album could have been great, and it's just decent because it's inconsistent.
Yeah, I heavily agree. I like to see how we're all based now.
Yes.
Right, so my favorite tracks from Machina 2 are Slow Dawn, Saturn 9, Soul Power, Kashgar Star version 1, Lucky 13, If There Is a God, Glass, Let Me Give the World to You, and Innocence. The worst tracks are Heavy Metal Machine and White Spider. Fuck White Spider, that song is awful.
God. Oh God.
My favorite tracks are Go, Home, In My Body, Innocence, Let Me Give the World to You, Real Love, Saturnine, and Vanity. My least favorite tracks are Glass Theme, Lucky 13, Soul Power, and White Spider.
Yeah, my favorite tracks from Machina 2 were Slow Dawn, Vanity, Try version 1, Glass, the original version. I want to make that very clear. I'm talking about the original version that's on the album of this. Go, Let Me Give the World to You, and Innocence. Billy, you gotta learn how to spell again. And my least favorites were Glass alternate version. See, I'm telling you, you need to listen to the right one. Glass alternate version, Soul Power, Heavy Metal Machine alternate version, and White Spider. Like if Run to Me is my least favorite, White Spider is my second least favorite. That's how bad that song is. Do not listen to it.
Honestly, I'm fucking there with you. You are based for that.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
Oh my god. And yeah, we're in the top 5 now. And for my number 5 pick, I chose Oceania.
I chose Gish.
Listen, Mickey. This it's been fun, but we need to stop this, okay? Because my number 5 pick is Oceania.
Damn. You see, I would say that, but we're both based. You don't understand that. We're both based.
Oh my gosh, you're so right.
Fuck yeah, dude. Fuck you, nostalgia.
Okay. Oh, I didn't say that. Let the record show I didn't say that. I love nostalgia.
I love you too, buddy. Anyways, Oceania. For me, Oceania was a moment where the Smashing Pumpkins were so close to recapturing the magic that made them a great band in their heyday, since there's so many great tracks and ideas throughout this album. But, of course, it wasn't meant to be, as there's some things that hold it back from its full potential. The things that hold Oceania back in particular is, some of the noticeable filler tracks that don't really feel that necessary in the grander scheme of the album, and feel derivative of some ideas that the band had done already, and I feel like the production can often feel way too squeaky clean and overly sterile at times, and that's the case with a lot of tracks on this album. Outside of these things though, there's some things to really appreciate Oceania for and make it likable. For example, the great tracks on here genuinely feel passionate and fun. Billy Corgan doesn't really seem to be taking himself too seriously on this album and is just focusing on making a bunch of tracks that are genuinely fun to listen to while also being creative and solidly produced. Now, the band's alt-rock sound on here does feel reminiscent of the sounds of Siamese Dream, but there's a lot of more noticeable synths being thrown around in this thing. There's some prog influences on a few cuts. I think that sounds great on here, and the songs at the core genuinely feel endearing and catchy. The main middle section of the album is the strongest point especially, and they make for some of the best tracks that the band have put out since Adore. And the guitar work is often really great on here, and there's a lot of great melodies and hooks on this album. It's a shame, really, that they weren't able to keep up a consistent quality margin, but alas, it'll do. It's sonically pretty cohesive. It sees the Pumpkins at their closest to replicating the quality of past projects, but, in some cases it falls flat. For me, I think it's a very decent album. It had so much potential, and it's, in my opinion, the best Smashing Pumpkins album post-Adore.
And I will agree.
Hell
this
yeah.
is actually a decent Pumpkins album. Thank you, Billy. it's a good album. But again, it's a frustrating one because, like you mentioned, this album could have been amazing, and it's the thing about this album is like this album definitely brings riffs. Like I do have to point out one riff in particular, like the Chimera riff. Like, ooh, that's a great riff, and it's just. It sounds like that they were kind of getting back into their stride, but again, the album kind of falls into that Machina, like post-the-door album formula that I explained in Machina, where it's like there's good songs and then it just kind of falls flat a little bit, and then it just kind of like picks up again, and it just doesn't really stick the landing, which is what's like very upsetting about this album, I guess is the word I would use, because there's not like terrible songs in this album, but it just kind of suffers from like inconsistency and some boring songs. And am I crazy? Like I don't know, for some reason Pinwheels, like the intro to that song, it sounds like a 21 Pilots song. Like maybe I'm stupid, but like I listened to that song and I was like, am I listening to Oceania or Original at Best right now? Like what's going on here? So it's like some little sprinkles of like the fate that this band would suffer post this album. Honestly, if Billy actually expanded upon this sound, we probably wouldn't be in the dire straits that we are now with this band, honestly. Like I feel like if they had just honed this album's sound and like expanded upon it and made it better, I think they would have probably released better albums than this. But no, this is where we are. Also, this album marks the time where Billy's has that like strange like vocal thing that he does now. I don't know if that's with age that he sounds like that, but if it's a music choice, yikes.
I went with the band's debut, Gish, which you're going to start seeing a pattern now, a pattern of positivity rather than negativity. I very much enjoy this album, and even for a debut project, I think it's very ambitious, it's very polished, and it absolutely sets a foundation on which the band would continue to build upon in their consecutive releases. It has plenty of fantastic moments of just neo-psychedelic alt-rock goodness, and it has very little in terms of duds. At the end of the day, I just don't think it's quite there yet. It doesn't quite reach the potential that the band would go on to reach. And the latter half of the track listing is at times a little derivative, which even despite its rather moderate length, it makes the album seem a little longer than it really is. But when we're talking about a project with tracks like Rhinoceros on it, any negatives that I really have are just me grasping at straws. And at the end of the day, it's just, I think the band has more complete albums and, projects on which they would expand the sound that they establish here. I think Gish is just a sneak peek into, the band's potential.
All right. My favorite tracks from Oceania are Violet Rays, Pinwheels, My Love is Winter, One Diamond, One Heart, and Oceania. My least favorite tracks are Glissandra and Wildflower.
My favorites in Oceania were Panopticon, The Celestials, My Love is Winter, The Chimera, and Inkless. I don't know why I like that song so much, but it's I think it's pretty good. And my least favorites were One Diamond, One Heart, Pinwheels, I'm sorry, and Wildflower.
You're forgiven.
My favorite tracks are I Am One, Siva, Rhinoceros, Bury Me, Crush, and Snail. My least favorite track is Suffer.
And now we're moving on to the top four. And for me, my number 4 pick is Gish.
My number 4 pick is Machina 1, The Machines of God.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I'm getting a little peeved, Mickey. I'm getting a little peeved. I'm building up some rage.
I think we're at the point in this ranking where you're just gonna have the same ones.
I'm building up my rage.
You're still just based.
Don't uncage me. This joke was not good. Yeah, it's Gish.
All right, so nostalgia is once again on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
So
gonna take a nap.
Right. All right, go on. All right, Gish. Prior to doing this whole worst to best, I've only ever heard 3 albums from the band. Those being Seer, which will be ignored for this point, Siamese Dream, and Melancholy. So when listening to Gish for the first time, it really put things into perspective in how the band pretty much had a sound formed from the get-go, and that sound made them stand out, and only soon after they would end up perfecting that sound on those albums I mentioned earlier. But on its own, Gish is a great album in my opinion. Sure, it's a bit, I guess, amateurish in a sense, but there's serious potential here. Now, the Smashing Pumpkins essentially came into the scene with this very eclectic sound that most people adore the band for. Their take on alt-rock stems from multiple influences, including hard rock, grunge, psychedelic rock, and much more, but the band culminated that sound in a way that feels very catchy, but also very endearing. It gives you an adrenaline rush, but it also puts you in a state of bliss. Not to mention, it feels like a very creative and innovative sound that came before the explosion of Nirvana and the grunge scene. The production on Gish is honestly quite good. It's not the best produced Smashing Pumpkins album, obviously, but for a debut, it sounds really good if you ask me. Billy Corgan and Butch Vig really did a great job with what they were given, and they blended the heavy and psychedelic sounds very well. Every instrument feels very clear and well balanced in the mix. You can hear everything clearly, and the nuances you can find here are as clear as day. Speaking of instruments, I think that the instrumentation from the band is really damn great. The heavy riffs and the blissful psychedelia is fantastic. The guitar work is great. The drumming is really tight and energetic, and the very beefy and seductive bass lines all over this thing are amazing, especially. Darcy really stole the show for me with her bass work on here. Gish has a lot of great tracks to its name, and despite some moments where it could fall a bit flat, I think there's plenty of fantastic tracks that outweigh those ones for me. Hell, there's even a batch of tracks here that reach some of Siamese Dream levels of brilliance, in my opinion. I can't even say that anything on this album feels derivative, since it has a bit of so much originality and creativity to its name, and generally speaking, I think it's a great debut album from the band that would, a band that would go on and get better thereafter.
Good album. Yeah, I mean, this is the beginning of Smashing Pumpkins, and luckily we are in the era now where these albums are good consistently. But I mean, even though this album is good and it's, a classic in its own right, it doesn't leave me with that much to talk about. Like, I like this album quite a bit, and I think it's just a solid early 90s album, and I'm glad you mentioned Nirvana, because again, like, this is an album that came out before Nevermind, and it's interesting that even though, like, everyone's like, oh, Nevermind, that's when the music turned to what it became, but it's like, Smashing Pumpkins, I gotta give them credit. They were there. They were there for the change. They were ready to go. And this album kind of signifies what the decade had in store for not only the band, but honestly for alternative rock in general. Like, I just think this album is very solid. That's really all I can say about it. Oh, and by the way, Siva rocks so hard and is like a top tier Pumpkin song. That like might be top 10 Pumpkin songs for me.
I went with Machina 1, Machines of God. And, I'll be the first to say I think this album is underrated. A lot of people say that the Pumpkins discography dipped after a door. I think Machina is up there with their first 4 albums. It's just from start to finish a very good project. It still retains some of the magic of the Pumpkins, hot streak of fantastic albums. And it definitely continues some of the gothic direction that the band took on Adore. Sorry.
Raise your arms.
And it definitely kind of implements some of their more shoegazy and psychedelic roots from albums like Gish or Melancholy or Siamese Dream even. But notably, it also adds a very industrial direction to the Pumpkin sound, which I think is executed really well here. Admittedly, there are moments like Heavy Metal Machine, which kind of make me want to cry. But for the most part, I think this album, does everything great. I think a lot of this more subtle and soft moments are, delivered by a band that, while not in their prime, still, are able to retain some of the magic of their best projects. And overall, it's still an album that I enjoy. It's an album that I would come back to. It has plenty of great moments. And while, it's not as consistent as their first 4 projects, I think the highs are even better than on their debut. And I think overall, it's still up there, in my opinion.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there, Chief, because that one's mid.
On base, man.
No. See, I'm the based one here. I am based in this chat right now.
but that's the thing. Like, I nostalgia. I thought that I used to be with you, but like I just remember like I re-listened to the album, and don't get me wrong, like I do like the songs that are on Machina are amazing. I think we can all agree with that. But it's like I don't know. Too long. Sorry.
Oops. I vibe with the whole thing, bar like 2 tracks maybe.
Yeah, Heavy Metal Machine is a no-go.
Not a strong point in the group's discography, that's for sure.
Okay.
I just imagine Billy like made that song and he's like, hey, James, Jimmy, whoever we replaced Darcy with halfway through the making of this album, you guys heard of this band that made this album called The Fragile?
Okay. Best and worst tracks. My favorite tracks on Gish are Snail, I Am One, Rhinoceros, Crush, Suffer, Tristessa, Windowpane, and Daydream. My least favorite track is Bury Me. And real quick, I just need to say something about Windowpane. I guess that's why they call it Windowpane, because you get to leave her watch it. You get to watch her leaving out the window.
Stop.
I'll give you PTSD for fucking shit Eminem bars. Let's go.
Oh God.
That's a real bar, by the way, Josh. That's real.
Oh, I know. Oh man. Anyways, I'm glad we got Marshall in here. My favorites on Gish are I Am One, Siva, Rhinoceros, Bury Me, Snail, Tristessa, and Daydream, and my least favorites are Suffer and Windowpane. But I like those songs.
My favorites on Machina are The Everlasting Gaze, Raindrops and Sun Showers, Stand Inside Your Love, Eye of the Morning, Try, This Time, Wound, and Age of Innocence. My least favorite tracks are Heavy Metal Machine and Glass and the Ghost Children.
We've made it to the top 3. Oh boy.
Yes. Let's go. We're not messing around anymore, boys.
We're really not. This is the cream of the crop. And in my opinion, the Smashing Pumpkins' 3rd best album is Adore.
And I agree.
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Okay. Okay. I should preface, we are in 9 out of 10 territory. These 3 albums are the reason why I decided to do this podcast, and the reason why I still, after all the suffering and pain that Billy Corgan put me through, why I still love this band. My number 3 pick is Siamese Dream.
Oh. Dude.
What?
I like it. Right. I like it. This album's amazing. I'm sorry.
What the fuck? What? What are you
doing?
I broke
the curse though. You're not copying me anymore, Mickey.
The fuck are you doing to me here? What? What?
Mick, your opinions align with this guy. Do you still think you're based, man?
Yeah, you might want to rethink some sentiments you made earlier in the episode.
Oh, I may need to rethink shit. Honestly, I may need to reconsider. Right, get this fucker out my server. Let's go.
I like this album. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's still top 3.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, Adore. Adore was a very drastic change of pace, not only for where the band was heading sonically, but also for the band members themselves, since there's a lot of personal issues that Billy Corgan had to deal with. The relationship he had with the rest of the band was tumultuous, and drummer Jimmy Chamberlain left the band for a good while. Not to mention, the whole alt-rock scene had completely shifted with the death of grunge, and many contemporaries of the Pumpkins pretty much fell apart or fell off. So it was a given that the band would end up evolving into new territories, and when they did it initially, it received mixed reception. But as time went on, Adore has gained a bit of an underrated status in the band's discography, And I too think that Adore is underrated, like seriously underrated. Adore saw the band essentially branch out into a sound that relied less on a lot of the heavy guitar-driven sounds with their previous 3 albums. Instead, they've opted to incorporate a sound that featured additional electronics and more gothy approaches to atmosphere. And while Adore is definitely a very indulgent affair and feels like a glorified Billy Corgan-led effort, I honestly think that it has so many moments of brilliance on here, and there's so many tracks that stand out to me as some of the band's absolute best moments. To get the pet peeves out of the way, I do think that it's, the very indulgent nature of this album is incredibly noticeable, and it especially begins to take its toll as the album goes on. Despite me liking nearly every song on this album, I will admit that it's a bit bloated. There's a few mixes on here, particularly on Billy Corgan's vocals, that are pretty questionable. And apparently Billy Corgan can't do maths because the last track, 17, is actually the 16th track in the album. Aside of that, though, I still think Adore is fantastic. Like I said, Billy Corgan pretty much feels the most prevalent on this album creatively and in what direction the album was taking. But this in turn allowed for songwriting that feels much more personal and very telling of what Billy Corgan was going through during this period. Like, there's songs on here that are about his divorce and his mother's death, and they're all written with such emotional potency and intimacy, and I think that Billy's songwriting is really damn great. The production and sonic change-ups and overall presentation of the album is really great. I like most of the mixing. I love the way that the more gothic and ambient sounds are implemented. I like how eclectic the Pumpkins remain with nearly every track. The electronic elements sound really great to me, and I think the arrangements and overall composition of these tracks are well constructed and enjoyable. There's so many tracks on this album that are just straight up gorgeous and beautiful. There's so many tracks that are just so enthralling and as incredible as some of the band's most emotional material. And for me, it's one of the strongest efforts in the Pumpkins' discography. It's not perfect by any means, but it's got so much strong and potent material to its name.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I like Gish and as much as I like Machina 1, I think the Pumpkins really just have 3 albums that stand above the rest, and Adore is certainly one of them. It is possibly one of the most unique albums in the band's discography. Its aesthetic and its approach is almost inspired by The Cure to me. It has a very hauntingly beautiful and dark atmosphere to it, and I think the band executed perfectly here. Sound wise, it's not too dissimilar to some of the more mellow and melancholy material on Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, but with a more gothic rock flair to it and a more electronic flair to it, which I think is executed again fantastically. I think instrumentally this project is very ethereal, very nocturnal, and very dense, and it showcases a more haunting and dark side of the Smashing Pumpkins. I think Billy and the company just excel on this project instrumentally, and atmospherically they really create something special. I'm just not as much of a contrarian as Josh to put this in my top 2. I think that is a little out there.
Okay. Let's relax.
But regardless, I still think it's an amazing project.
All right, I'm not trying to be a contrarian out here, and that's the thing. Okay. I like this album. I like it a lot. I love it. It's Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins. Of course I love it. This album's a classic, and everyone knows it. Like, it doesn't matter who you talk to, like, whether you think that this band fell off right after this album and people didn't like how long Melancholy was. This album is adored the world. Get it? The world around. This album goes so hard, and it just crashes out the door with Cherub Rock, and it just doesn't let up. I mean, until it does, but we'll get to that. But like, this album is so good, and it is like the definition of classic Pumpkins, at least what most people would classify as classic Pumpkins. I love the blending of the fuzzy and heavier sounds of 90s alt rock mixed with like these like shoegaze tinged elements. It's just like, it's such a heavy, grand album, and it just puts this album in a special place in terms of like talking about 90s classic albums. And this is the beginning, for me personally, the beginning of the 3 Smashing Pumpkins albums that can consistently just make me weep. Like, this album is so beautiful. It's so good, and everyone knows it. So here's why I put it at number 3. The only thing that I will say, the only issue that I have with this album is that some songs kind of overstay their welcome a little bit. That is not necessarily a terrible thing. And again, I have this album at 9. I love it. It's amazing. But it kind of makes the album feel a bit too long for not a real reason, which, I mean, that's rich coming from, like, the fact that this band has made a freaking 2-hour-long double album. But I don't know. For me, it's some songs overstay their welcome just a little bit. But it doesn't matter because all these songs are great. This album is amazing. I don't need to tell you that. Y'all already know, but that's just why I have it at number 3. And I have personal reasons as for why I have my next 2 picks above it.
Okay. All right, so that my favorite tracks from Adore are To Sheila, Ava Adore, Perfect, Daphne Descends, Once Upon a Time, Shame, Pug, Behold, The Nightmare, and for Martha, my least favorite tracks are Annie Dog and Blank Page.
My favorite tracks are To Sheila, Ava Adore, Perfect, Daphne Descends, Once Upon a Time, Tear, Apples and Oranges, Pug, The Tale of Dusty and Pistol Pete, and Annie Dog. Oh no, there's more. Shame, Behold, Behold the Nightmare, and For Martha. And my least favorite track is Crestfallen.
See, there's a lot of good songs in that album. Come on, guy. But no, my favorites on Siamese Dream are Cherub Rock, Quiet, Today, Rocket, Disarm, Soma, Geek USA, Mayonnaise, Silver Fuck. Like, again, this album is good. Okay, this album is good. I like it. But my least favorite is Sweet Sweet.
Okay. We're in the top 2 now. And for me, my number 2 pick is Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness.
My number 2 pick is Siamese Dream.
Yes.
Everyone's having convulsions. Happening.
And my number 2 pick is Adore. I have no shame.
We finally have a diverse part of the ranking. Let's fucking go, lads.
Yes.
Did not think it would be number 2.
Honestly, like... So, yeah, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. To say that Melancholy was a massive project for the Smashing Pumpkins would honestly still be selling it short, since it's honestly such a behemoth of an album in terms of both ambition and quantity. You know, bands could have easily crashed and burned if they attempted to do what the Pumpkins did on Melancholy, but the Smashing Pumpkins really pulled through and did it themselves, and the quality truly speaks for itself, since Melancholy, for lack of better words, is brilliant from front to back. It is a near perfect album. Now, it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime albums where you can have so much material on one project and nearly every single song is just as good as the other. It's incredibly impressive. It's mind-blowing still, and to think that this thing is 2 hours long and it doesn't feel like it is just insane. It's a double album, and it certainly seems like a challenging listen when you first approach it, but truthfully, the album just has so much behind it that's just stellar and pure, unadulterated quality. You know, Melancholy features a lot of the same alt-rock sounds and influences that define the Smashing Pumpkins on Siamese Dream, like grunge, hard rock, and dream pop, but on Melancholy, a lot more folk and orchestral instrumentation is brought into the mix, and the heavier songs on here are getting heavier. There's more metal influences on the guitar tones, and compositionally, the songs are just getting much more ambitious and at times more gritty. With the abundance of material on this album, it just has so much to offer in terms of sounds and influences, but it still manages to sound very cohesive and very consistent. Now, the performances from the band are top-notch through and through. Billy Corgan really shines through, especially as a vocalist and a songwriter. His angst-driven lyrics once again feel very passionate, very genuine, but it also feels like there's an overtly poetic edge to what he's saying, and he honestly blows me away half of the time. They're even emphasized further by his endearing yet dynamic vocal performances. Well, instrumentally, the album is fantastic, the riffs are fantastic, the atmospheres are very dense and at times just gorgeous. more intimate sounds are incredibly beautiful, and there's so many catchy moments throughout its runtime. The production is fantastic through and through. The larger-than-life and existential approach to the album pays off in numerous ways, and that very emotive charm that I love about the Smashing Pumpkins that I love them for is still shining as bright as day all throughout. There's so many amazing tracks on this album, some of which that I would rank among some of the band's best. It's an ambitious undertaking, and that absolutely pays off in a lot of ways. There's only really one track that I'm not too crazy about, but everything else on here is just impeccable, and that alone is incredibly impressive to me. I won't go on any further. It hurts to put Melancholy at number 2, but either way, it's a fucking amazing album. It's a near masterpiece for me.
Yeah, Siamese Dream is my number 2 pick, and it's absolutely incredible. It's an alternative rock masterpiece from start to finish, and absolutely one of my favorite albums of the 90s. One of my favorite albums of all time. I don't really know where to start here, so I'll start with the thing that to me stands out immediately when listening to this project: the guitar work. As a massive shoegaze fan, Corgan and James just completely nailed the tone, the power, the dynamics of the guitar work here. It's just assembled so beautifully, so, it's overwhelmingly beautiful. It sounds so sentimental, so peaceful at times, and so aggressively in your face at others. It's honestly one of my favorite guitar albums of all time. And of course, Darcy and Jimmy's contributions aren't to be underestimated either. Both have an unquestionable presence throughout this record, and instrumentally, it's the pinnacle of 90s, alt rock. Songwriting here is not only among the Pumpkins' best, but it's overall one of the best written and, in my opinion, best performed albums of all time. Songs like Mayonnaise and Today are hauntingly beautiful, and Corgan's vocals are just incredible. He's absolutely one of my favorite vocalists of all time. His voice is just so unique and so powerful and so dynamic. This album is honestly magical. Every second is incredible. And I know that this is the pick of the bunch for a lot of people, and, I would never dare argue against someone who would consider this to be the best Smashing Pumpkins album. But there's just another project that just holds a special place in my heart and that I adore even more.
I see what you did there.
That wasn't intentional, man. Everything's a pun.
Well, since we're making this pun, I looks left, looks right. Adore this album.
He did the funny.
Okay, let's get serious.
Okay.
No. Okay, fine. I'll change my opinion. Number 2 is Siamese Dream. Okay. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Adore. I love this album. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but I can't really usually explain it very well because, again, I get the whole, you put this above Siamese Dream. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I like this album a lot. I like it as much as that album. I think the concept behind this album, where it's 15 different songs tackling the many different aspects of love, is amazing. When you have songs talking about loving relationships, toxic relationships, family relationships, heartbreak, loss of life, it's all here. And it sounds so beautiful in the most late era 90s way possible. I think this album just sounds so unique in their discography. I think you mentioned that earlier, Nostalgia, and I completely agree. And that's kind of why it sometimes puts itself above Siamese Dream more often than not. And this album just gets me so emotional for the majority of the runtime. It's just such a heartbreaking album for a band who's already quite heartbreaking, considering their last album was called Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. The fact that they went on that long tour and toured that album, and then Billy suffered the loss of his mother, and he went through a divorce, and he lost Jimmy Chamberlain and Jonathan Melvoin after they overdosed on heroin in a hotel room, and it actually ended up killing Jonathan Melvoin. It just terrible things happened to this band during that era, and it just drives the sadness so hard on this album. And honestly, I I really can't get enough of it. I think this album is amazing. I know that most people don't agree. I'm sorry to the hundreds of people who have just now disliked this video because I put Siamese Dream at number 3 and have clicked off and just hate my guts. I'm sorry, but this album just kind of does things to me emotionally, and I can't help but love it because of that fact. Sorry.
And I can absolutely respect that. I no need to be sorry, bro. I absolutely get it. Okay, you better be fucking sorry. All right.
I like late 90s bleep bloop electronics, man. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, with that in mind, I've decided to split my favorite tracks from both the discs. So my favorite tracks from disc 1 of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness are Tonight Tonight, Jelly Belly, Zero, Here Is No Why, Bullet with Butterfly Wings, To Forgive, Galapagos, Porcelain of the Vast Oceans, and Take Me Down. My favorite tracks on disc 2 are Where Boys Fear to Tread, Bodies, 33, my second favorite Smashing Pumpkins song, 1979, Through the Eyes of Ruby, We Only Came Out at Night, By Starlight, and Farewell and Goodbye. My least favorite track is Love.
My favorite tracks are all of them, but a special shout out to Mayonnaise, which is in my top 3 favorite Smashing Pumpkins tracks. My least favorite tracks are none of them.
I have to do this.
You do.
You got this. You got this. All right. My favorites on Adore are Tushila, Ava Adore, Perfect, Daphne Descends, Once Upon a Time, Tear, Crestfallen, Apples and Oranges, Shame, and For Martha. My least favorite is Behold the Nightmare.
And now we're at the number 1 spot. And if it wasn't obvious for me, my favorite album in the Smashing Pumpkins discography, what I think is their best, is Siamese Dream.
I went with Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness.
Thank you, Nostalgia. Thank you for being here with me. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is, in my opinion, the best album in their discography. Thank you and good night.
Oh, I guess I'm alone here now. We still have to talk. Well, I guess I'm alone right here now. Okay. Yeah, Siamese Dream. Just... wow, man. This album is just... it's just such a fucking trip from start to finish. Like, every day since I've heard this album, I've been subconsciously debating whether I prefer it to Melancholy or not. And of course, since it's at the top of my list, I do believe it's the better album, and to me, it's an honest-to-God masterpiece from start to finish. It's easily one of the best albums of the 1990s, in my opinion, if not the best. Gish set forth a sound that would define the Smashing Pumpkins, and, on their sophomore album, they took what they did with the debut and ended up turning things up by 11, while at the same time mastering the art of heaviness, beauty, and melancholy. Those 3 words are the perfect descriptors for this album, really, because that's all it really is through and through. And every time I go to listen to it, it's almost like I'm listening to it for the first time again, because this album is one of those where it just never manages to lose its charm or enjoyability as time passes. Hell, it pretty much carries so many alt-rock staples in its sound, but it's aged like fine wine. To start, the production is amazing. It's the band's best produced album, in my opinion. It spawned one of my favourite guitar tones of all time. The Siamese Dream guitar tone is just incredible, to say the least. The heavy guitars build a wall of fuzz, atmosphere, and distortion, but it's also one of the most emotive I've ever heard in my life. It simply sounds perfect to my ears, and I love it to death. Then we get the more psychedelic, shoegazy, and atmospheric tones, which just sounds so hypnotic and trance-like. It encapsulates the dream part of Siamese Dream, and it complements what Billy Corgan and the band do excellently. There's not enough great things I could say about the production of this album, really. It's one of the best produced albums of all time. Butch Vig and Billy Corgan really outdid themselves and made a sonic masterclass, in my opinion. Instrumentally, there's just so much to love about Siamese Dream. The guitar work is amazing. It's so dynamic. It's so engaging. It's easily got some of the best guitar work and riffs in the band's discography. The bass lines are slick on this album, and the drumming is fucking fantastic. I cannot get enough of Jimmy Chamberlain's drumming on this album, honestly. It's that amazing to me. The compositions and song structures are fantastic all over this thing, and one of the best parts of the album for me is Billy Corgan himself. His nasally yet endearing vocals make these tracks for me, and his lyrics are excellent all over his album. His bittersweet songwriting is just often so gut-wrenching and intense that it's so hard to take in all at once, and knowing what the band was going through during this period, and what Billy was going through over this period as well, it makes them come off all the more raw and potent. Every track on Siamese Dream is perfect in my opinion. Some of the best alt-rock songs of all time are on this album, and one of my favourite songs of all time is on this album. My favourite Pumpkin song is on this album, I will get to. And despite its hour-long length, it just never fails to, disengage me from just this whole experience, and it has so much quality that makes me want to come back to it. I mean, I just grown to have such a weird emotional connection to this album, and honestly, it's just great. It nearly brings me to tears, honestly. So yeah, I won't blab on any further. Just know that Siamese Dream is an incredible fucking album. It's a perfect album in my opinion, and it's, in my opinion, the best Smashing Pumpkins album.
Yeah, I went with Melancholy. And this album to me is just, it's one of a kind, and it's a special album that's been there with me throughout I can't remember a time where I didn't know this project. I got into the Pumpkins early on, and, this album has been an ever-present force in my life ever since. It's quite possibly my favorite double album of all time, and it's an album that completely pushed the Smashing Pumpkins sound to new heights that few in the alternative rock scene could ever hope to replicate. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's a groundbreaking achievement, and it's an intensely powerful journey of a record. I have ADHD. I often have a hard time with long albums, but there are a handful of records that consistently blow me away and consistently deliver track after track of just incredible after incredible track that just keep me engaged throughout. And this is certainly one of them. Not once does this album ever dip in quality. There's no, weak points in the album. There's not like a series of tracks that's kind of underwhelming or forgettable. There's no filler. Every single track just hits you with just emotional potency, with just something new and unique. Every single idea they attempt here is executed perfectly, and it's just mind-blowing how the band were able to, develop and create so much new material, and an album that is so long that just never once fails to disappoint. It blows me away. This album is just, it's legendary. It's incredible. Its consistency is just, it's mind-blowing. It's literally magic. I don't know how the Pumpkins had it in them when these days they can't even release one good track across 6 albums. It's every single track on here is incredible. It's such an eclectic and exhilarating album. It's an absolute masterpiece, and it's the best thing they've ever done in my opinion. Also, a special shout out to 1979, which is my favorite song of all time. It makes me cry a lot.
Honestly?
Yeah,
it makes me cry too.
My favorite music video of all time. We're at it.
Yeah, that music video is amazing. It's so good. It's just it's weirdly nostalgic. I love it.
Yeah, man, it makes me be like, man, I wish I missed the 91. Good times.
Motherfucker, I wasn't even born, but I missed the 90s.
Yeah, good times. I want to fucking destroy someone's fucking garden, commit a few crimes, rob a shop. Good times.
Yeah.
Yeah, break your neck off while sliding down a tire down a hill. I'd love to do that, Good times.
True. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Billy Corgan described this album as the wall for Generation X. And he do be spitting facts, though. This actually, he ended up making a substantially better album than that, in my personal opinion. This is the greatest.
Don't hate on the wall. Come on.
I don't hate on the wall, but this is a better album than the wall.
I will agree, but come on, don't hate on the fucking wall, man. Don't hate on the wall.
You can't stop me. But the thing with this album is like Nostalgia put out, and even if when you listen to the companion piece of the airplane flies high. How the hell do you write this many songs in that period of time? And they are incredible. Like, I feel like whenever people just use the term lightning in a bottle, this is always my definition. There is never going to be another album like this where you just have 28 banger songs on an album, and then you have a box set of B-side collections that have bangers in them as well. This album is one of a kind, and if I may get a tad bit serious for a second, not to be cliche or sappy, but I mean, this album changed my life. Like, it just changed my whole perspective on music. It changed my whole perspective on how music makes you feel, and it changed my whole perspective on lyricism and just every aspect of music. This album changed it for me, and it definitely was a album that I used to help me through, and still helps me through some dark times, and the lyrics just totally do that for me. I mean, it's like, this album makes me cry every time I listen to it without fail, and it does it multiple occasions, just because it's just so real, and it's so potent. And I think the 1979 when you bring that song up, that's kind of the drive. It's not my favorite song on the album. I mean, it's an amazing song, don't get me wrong. It's one of the best songs ever written, but for me, it's like, that's the driving force of this album, is just looking back fondly on your nostalgic childhood and having to deal with growing up and having to deal with all of the shit that bogs you down in life. And again, like, the lyrics reflect all of that. Like, the standout lyrics, I could go on and on about, like, that life can change, that you're not stuck in vain, the impossible is possible, emptiness is loneliness, and loneliness is cleanliness, cleanliness is godliness, and God is empty just like me. The classic, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. I fear that I am ordinary just like everyone. Love is suicide. Carve your heart out for keeps in an old oak tree. In my mind, I'm everyone. We don't even care to shake these zipper blues because we don't know where our bones will rest. Faster than we thought we'd go beneath the sound of hope. It's just, this album is a journey. And the thing with Siamese Dream is, that is definitely a definitive mark of the 90s, and it's a classic 90s album that put Smashing Pumpkins on the map and put them with their contemporaries. Melancholy shot them to the stratosphere and made them soar above everybody that they were in competition with in the 90s. It is a one-of-a-kind album. I don't think an album like this will ever come out ever again, and even despite all the things that Smashing Pumpkins are doing now, I think this album is a perfect representation of why the Pumpkins still matter and why we should still care about the Pumpkins, even if they're in dire straits right now. This album is absolutely amazing. If you haven't heard it, why are you here? What are you doing? Go and listen to that album right now.
Yeah, I encourage that too, and also listen to Siamese Dream. Okay, so
yes,
yeah, my favorite tracks from Siamese Dream are, well, all of them, but to get specific here, Cherub Rock, Hummer, Disarm, Soma, Geek USA, Mayonnaise, Spaceboy, Silverfuck, Luna, and my favorite Smashing Pumpkins song of all time, a song that, oh boy, every time I listen to it, it just feels like a roller coaster for me, and that is Today. I fucking love that song so much, man. It's one of my favorite songs ever. And worst tracks.
When I said no, sorry. When I said that, again, I have it at number 3. Haha, funny meme. Today is top 3, maybe top 2 Smashing Pumpkins songs.
It's my favorite. And worst tracks. Yeah. Shut up. No worst tracks.
Yep, my favorite tracks on Melancholy are all of them somehow. My least favorite are none of them somehow.
Yeah, that's the anomaly. I mean, I'm kind of there. My favorite tracks are pretty much every song on the album, which is insane to think about. I mean, I guess if I'm going to get into specifics, every single is a banger. No question. Every single on this album, Tonight, Zero, Bullet with Butterfly Wings, 33, 1979, just listen to all of those. And even Muzzle, which was supposed to be a single, listen to that song too. But if I had to single out some deep cuts, fucking Here's No Why, To Forgive, An Ode to No One, Galapagos, Poor Selena of the Vast Oceans, Where Boys Fear to Tread, Bodies, Tales of a Scorched Earth, Through the Eyes of Ruby, Stumbling, XYU, which I most of the time will say is the best Smashing Pumpkins song. That song, if there's nothing that you listen to after this podcast, at least check out XYU. That song is on another plane of existence. And, I mean, there's no least favorite track. It's amazing. It's how they were able to do that. This album's amazing. This era of Smashing Pumpkins is amazing. Sorry that they're not like this now, but we have albums like this to remember the good old times.
Right, we have 25 minutes to make up Melancholy, like, so nostalgia, do your work. Add some distortion onto everything that goes on after this.
Sure.
And just extend it with like shitloads of reverb and fucking and echoes and shit. You got to do that.
It'll be like 2016 YouTube where everyone was desperate to get their video to 10 minutes, so they were just leaving fucking 2 minutes of silence at the end of their shitty video.
Yeah.
A 20-minute fucking like outro song.
just throw on Glass and the Ghost Children twice. No one's going to notice.
I'll just add some royalty-free lo-fi hip-hop beats to study / click off the video to.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, we'll just end it there. Josh, thank you so much for coming back on. It was a pleasure having you back on again.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always great to be here.
Yeah, do you have anything to shout out, like socials or anything?
I mean, not really. I haven't been writing any reviews on Album of the Year, but, hopefully that'll change soon if I kick myself in the ass hard enough.
Me and you both.
And
no, it's just pleasure
I
to
guess
be
we'll
here.
just
I
end
don't
it.
know.
Okay, we'll end it there. Thank you guys so much for checking out today's episode of the Taped Podcast. We really hope that you enjoyed. Who did you agree with the most? What are some of your favorite Smashing Pumpkins albums? What are some of your least favorite ones? Please let us know. Be sure to check the necessary links in the description to some of our previous podcast episodes, as well as our own individual channels, as well as our Album of the Year and Rate Your Music pages. And with that in mind, my name's been MickyT.
I've been Nostalgia.
And I've been Josh. Me.
See ya!
Peace.
Also, if you agree with me, please let me know in the comments. It's good that I know I'm not alone.
I get 0 comments.
Yeah, no one's going to agree with me, but that's fine.
We'll see.